In the shadowy depths of our family home, buried beneath decades of forgotten iron and dust, we unearthed a sealed well that whispered ancient secrets. As a guttural croak echoed from its cracked lid, I couldn't shake the chilling realization. Our father hadn't been hoarding junk. He'd been forging a barrier against something unholy. And now, snowbound with my estranged brother, we were about to break it open. The memory of my brother's departure still haunts me like a ghost in the attic. I was just 8, a wide-eyed kid clinging to the magic of childhood when the world shattered. It was right after 9/11, that day when innocence evaporated like morning fog over the Pine Barrens. Our family had been a cozy bubble, filled with laughter and the scent of Mom's homemade apple pie. But then my brother, my hero, signed up for the army. Afghanistan swallowed him whole, and what came back, well, it wore his face, but the light in his eyes had dimmed to a stranger's flicker. We used to joke that he'd been replaced by an alien, Mom and I. Her worry lines deepened with every deployment update, her blood pressure spiking like a storm warning. It culminated in a stroke that stole her vitality bit by bit. I put my life on pause, dreams of art school, a career, everything, to care for her. Those years blurred into a haze of medications, doctor's visits, and quiet nights where I'd whisper stories to her just to see a faint smile. She slipped away peacefully in her own bed, a small mercy in the chaos. I grieved, but deep down, I think we all breathed a sigh of relief that her suffering ended without fanfare. While I tended to Mom, my brother built his empire, a steady job, a loving wife, kids who adored him. He sent money, visited when he could, but an invisible wall grew between us. His children saw me not as the fun aunt with paints and wild tales, but as the cautionary tale, the woman stuck at home in her 30s, no prospects, no escape. They didn't know the weight of sacrifice, the mental fog that clung to me like spiderwebs after years of isolation. It stung, that judgment, ignoring the battles I'd fought silently. Dad's decline hit like a slow-moving avalanche. Retirement wasn't kind to him. Forced medical leave stripped away his passion for teaching South Jersey's tangled history and the eerie folklore of the Pine Barrens. He'd always been a collector, a tinkerer, but the basement transformed into a labyrinth of scrap metal, mostly iron piled high in chaotic stacks. It bordered on obsession, pathological even. As Mom faded, Dad needed constant care too, his mind unraveling thread by thread. Without his students, Dad turned to Reddit for solace. He was a star in a niche historical subreddit, sharing tales that danced on the edge of fact and myth. But boundaries blurred. He couldn't separate folklore from truth anymore. The ban crushed him, stoic through job loss and Mom's death. But this, it broke the dam. Tears streamed as he stared at the screen, unable to post. I couldn't bear it. So I hired a tech whiz to craft a fake Reddit clone, complete with bots that replied to his rambles with eager questions and praise. Judge me if you must, but for his final year, Dad reclaimed a spark of his old self. It was a fragile illusion, but better than the void. Now, they're all gone. The house echoes with silence, a tomb of memories. My days stretch empty, no one to share trivial thoughts with. Mom understood me in ways no one else could. Dad tried, but it wasn't the same. The pressure of caregiving burst, leaving me adrift. I don't resent my brother for living his life. He visited, called, supported, but his nudges to get my act together grated, ignoring the scars I carried. I deserved a moment to breathe. This holiday season dragged cold and lonely until January brought the storm and my brother. Snow blanketed the world, trapping us inside. We agreed to keep the house in the family. I'd stay. A minor squabble over Mom's white gold ring fizzled out, or so I thought. But the place was a hoarder's haven after 40 years, crammed with relics. My brother, ever the control freak, insisted on supervising the purge. Secretly, I welcomed the help, his sharp eye for valuables, deciding what to sell or keep for his kids. The timing felt deliberate, this snow and a forced reunion. My brother struggled with emotions like Dad, but I sensed his intent. Mend our frayed bond. It wasn't all tension. We laughed over childhood toys. He-Man figures we'd brawled over, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Jurassic Park dinosaurs, WWF wrestlers. Mom called them all men, never dolls or action figures, a whimsical find. Then, the old PlayStation emerged from a dusty corner. I'd hidden the wires years ago. Petty revenge when he shut me out from his friends. Remember that snow day weekend? He asked, a wistful smile cracking his facade. We beat Spider-Man together. Regret lingered in his eyes, a silent apology. We powered through upstairs and main floor, even binging Mystery Science Theater 3,000 episodes. It thawed the ice. For the first time since our youth, we felt like equals. He lectured on finishing my degree. I coaxed him into trying weed, a milestone we kept private. Progress, albeit awkward. But the basement loomed. That door, latched with a hook since our toddler days to prevent falls. It was hooked shut. Odd. I hadn't ventured down since the infamous barefoot slug trauma. Shudder. Unlatching it released a puff of dust, motes dancing in the stale air. Fumbling for the light switch, I braced for cobwebs. The bulb flickered on, but the musty odor hit first, thick and ancient. Creaky wooden stairs descended, gaps between treads wide enough for imaginary hands to snag ankles. My skin prickled. At the bottom, on a faded carpet that might have once been blue, sat Dad's forgotten workout gear from the 80s. Rusty weights, a bench press, all buried under boxes, tubs, and crates brimming with iron scraps. Sharp edges gleamed ominously. I eyed them warily, uninsured and tetanus-phobic. Dad's stories flooded back as we sorted. He'd weave hikes through wetlands with tales of bog iron, the blood of the Barrens, used in Revolutionary War cannonballs from old villages, and the Jersey Devil, born in the Leeds house where his family once lived, or so he claimed. Fact and fiction intertwined in his mind. The thickest pile huddled under the stairs, a fortress of metal. We hauled it out, muscles aching. Had Dad amassed this alone? My brother stepped upstairs for a call. No signal down here. Our soundtrack, a 90s radio, blaring alt-rock mixes. Blink 182, Harvey Danger, Evanescence. But as the corner cleared, static crackled, growing erratic. Magnetic interference from the iron, I pondered, flipping through a dusty Fangoria magazine on the bench press. Something caught my eye. A blue tarp under the stairs, not just covering scrap. Shifting a kitty litter tub, I peeled back the edge. There, embedded in the floor, a cobblestone well, capped with a 4-inch cement slab. I froze, heart pounding. This relic from the old farmland era, directly below my bedroom, the house built atop it, yet Dad never mentioned it. He'd have loved this historical gem. Transfixed, I traced a deep crack in the cement, veins spidering across. Then, a sound pierced the haze, a low, continuous croak, like a frog or cricket, but wrong for winter. It swelled, deep and insistent. Eyes narrowing, I leaned in, ear hovering over the fissure. A blast of static screamed from the radio. I yelped, scrambling to silence it. The croak vanished. Unease coiled in my gut. I bolted upstairs to find my brother. He stared at me, brow furrowed, as I spilled the details in a rush. The well, the strange croak, the way the sound had slithered up from the crack like something alive. Skepticism flickered across his face at first, the same look he used to give me when I swore the basement shadows moved. But he followed me down anyway, flashlight in hand, steps deliberate on those treacherous stairs. The basement air felt thicker now, heavier with anticipation. We crouched beside the well, the tarp fully pulled back. Up close, the cobblestones were ancient, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten water. The cement cap looked hastily poured, uneven edges betraying urgency rather than care. My brother ran his fingers along the same deep crack I'd traced earlier. "This isn't new," he muttered. "Dad must have sealed it years ago, maybe decades." I swallowed. He never said a word. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shone the light into the fissure. Nothing visible, just impenetrable black. But the silence down here felt wrong, expectant. Like the well was listening. We retreated upstairs for dinner, the topic hanging between us like smoke. Over reheated leftovers, he finally spoke, voice low. Dad talked to me a lot toward the end, rambling mostly. But one thing stuck, something about building a seal. He kept repeating it like a mantra. I thought it was the dementia talking, mixing up his old stories again. Bog iron, Jersey Devil, all that Pine Barrens nonsense. But now, he trailed off staring at his plate. I waited, pulse quickening. "Iron repels the unholy," he said quietly. "That's what the old folklore says. Pure iron keeps certain things at bay. Dad hoarded it for a reason, not just collecting. Protecting. The words landed like stones in my stomach. All those years watching him drag scrap metal down the stairs, muttering about welding projects that never materialized. I dismissed it as eccentricity. Now it felt like a desperate ritual. We agreed. No prying tonight. Too tired, too unsettled. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay in the dark, replaying the croak in my head. It hadn't been imagination. It had rhythm, almost like breathing. Slow, patient. Dreams found me eventually, jagged and suffocating. I was underground, walls pressing in, the same droning croak vibrating through my bones. Shadows shifted, forming shapes that weren't quite human. A voice spoke, harsh, guttural syllables that clawed at the edge of understanding. Not German, but something older, angrier, words that tasted like rust and wet earth. I tried to scream, but my throat closed. Something cold brushed my ankle, then tightened. I jolted awake, sheets tangled, heart hammering. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the hallway nightlight. My hand instinctively reached for Mom's ring on the nightstand. Comfort, anchor. It wasn't there. Panic surged. I tore through the bedding, checked under the pillow, along the seams of the mattress. Nothing. My stomach twisted. I hadn't taken it off. I never did. The white gold band had been a constant since the funeral, a piece of her I could still touch. Barefoot, I padded to the guest room. My brother's door was cracked open, soft snores drifting out. Guilt gnawed at me even as I slipped inside. His roller bag sat unzipped on the floor beside the bed. I hesitated, then knelt, heart in my throat. There it was, gleaming on top of folded shirts. Mom's ring. My ring. I snatched it, fingers trembling, and backed out before he stirred. Back in my room, I clutched it so hard the metal bit into my palm. He'd denied wanting it when we argued before, but his wife had always eyed it with quiet envy. Had he taken it while I slept? Or no. My brother was stubborn, controlling, sometimes cruel with his judgments. But a thief, a liar, never. Not him. Yet doubt festered. The ring felt heavier now, colder against my skin. Morning came gray and relentless, snow still piling against the windows. We barely spoke over coffee. The well waited below like an open wound. Around noon, we descended again. Tools in hand, crowbar, hammer, flashlight. My brother went first, jaw set. I followed, every creak of the stairs amplified in my ears. The radio sat silent on the workbench. No static today, just oppressive quiet. We positioned ourselves around the cement lid. My brother wedged the crowbar into the widest crack. On 3, he said. I nodded, gripping the other end. 1, 2, 3. Metal screeched against stone. The crack widened with a low groan. Dust puffed upward. We pried harder. Another splintering sound, then the slab shifted, tilting. A rush of cold, damp air escaped, carrying the faint metallic tang of old water and something fouler. We froze. From the darkness below came the croak again. Louder now, closer. Not a frog, not an echo. It was answering. My brother's face drained of color. Dad wasn't crazy, he whispered. The slab teetered. One more heave and it would fall. I looked at him. He looked at me. We were about to find out what he'd been sealing away all these years. The crowbar slipped an inch, metal grinding against stone. My brother's knuckles whitened. One more, he rasped. I braced myself, muscles screaming from the strain. Together we heaved. The cement slab gave with a wet, tearing crack, like bones snapping under pressure. It tilted violently, then crashed to the side, shattering into jagged chunks across the basement floor. Dust billowed up in a choking cloud. We both staggered back, coughing, eyes watering. The well yawned open, a perfect circle of darkness, maybe 3 feet across. The cobblestone rim was slick with condensation, glistening under the bare bulb. Cold air rose in slow, lazy curls, carrying that same metallic reek, old water, rust, and something sour, almost alive. The croak came again, immediate this time, not distant, not muffled. It rose straight up from the throat of the well, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest like a subwoofer buried underground. My brother shone the flashlight beam straight down. The light caught wet stone walls descending maybe 10, 12 feet before the darkness swallowed it. Water shimmered at the bottom, black, oily, unmoving. No ripples, no bubbles. just that surface, reflecting the beam back in fractured slivers. Then something moved. A shadow, long, thin, sinuous, slid across the water's edge, too quick to make out. My brother sucked in a breath. "Did you see that?" I nodded, throat too dry to speak. The croak shifted pitch, becoming a slow, deliberate gurgle, like laughter drowned in mud. We stood frozen, seconds stretched into eternity. My mind raced through every Pine Barrens tale Dad ever told, the Jersey Devil screeching through the pines, the Leeds witch cursing her 13th child into monstrosity, the bog iron that supposedly bound evil things to the earth. Iron repels the unholy. Dad's words echoed in my skull. All that scrap metal, the seal. He hadn't been losing his mind. He'd been holding something back. My brother lowered himself to one knee, peering closer. "There's writing," he said suddenly, "on the inside rim." I crouched beside him, heart thudding so hard I felt it in my teeth. The flashlight beam trembled across the stones, carved into the mortar between cobblestones. Crude, frantic letters, as if done with a nail or a knife. "Keep it closed. Do not feed it remembers." Below that, scratched deeper, almost gouged, "I am sorry," my brother's voice cracked. "That's Dad's handwriting." The realization hit like ice water. He hadn't just sealed an old well. He'd sealed something alive. Something that had been down there long before the house was built. Maybe since the farmland days. Since the pioneer village melted bog iron into cannonballs for a war nobody remembers anymore. The gurgle rose again, louder, insistent. Then words, not English, not quite. Harsh consonants, wet and guttural, the same language from my dream. They slithered up the shaft, wrapping around us. I felt them press against my skin, cold and invasive. My brother stood abruptly. "We need to cover it. Now." We scrambled for the broken slab pieces, dragging the largest chunk back toward the opening. But as we lifted it, the croak exploded into a shriek, high, piercing, inhuman. The flashlight beam jerked wildly. Something surged up the well, fast, too fast. A thin, pale tendril whipped out of the darkness, slick and glistening, wrapping around my brother's ankle. He screamed. I dropped the slab fragment and lunged, grabbing his waist, pulling with everything I had. The tendril tightened, dragging him toward the edge. His nails scraped stone, searching for purchase. "Don't let go," he yelled. I planted my feet, heels digging into the carpet, and yanked backward. The thing resisted, strong, impossibly strong, then suddenly released. My brother tumbled into me. We both crashed to the floor in a heap. The tendril withdrew with a wet slurp. Silence returned, heavy and mocking. We lay there panting, staring at the black mouth of the well. The flashlight had rolled away, beam pointing uselessly at the ceiling. Shadows danced across the cobblestones. My brother's voice was small. "It let go. Why did it let go?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew. It remembered. Remembered the boy who used to play in the basement, the one who laughed at Dad's stories. Remembered the sister who stayed behind, who cared for the parents it had watched through floorboards and dreams. Remembered the family it had waited generations to taste again. And now, we'd cracked the seal. We didn't speak as we shoved what was left of the slab back over the opening. It didn't fit perfectly anymore. Jagged edges left gaps, but it was enough for now. We piled every scrap of iron we could find on top. Weights, pipes, rusted tools, a makeshift barricade. Dad's last defense, rebuilt in panic. Upstairs, we locked the basement door, triple-checked the hook, and neither of us suggested going back down tonight. We sat in the living room, lights blazing, snow howling against the windows. My brother stared at his ankle, red welts already forming in the shape of fingers that weren't quite human. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything. For pushing you, for not being here when you needed me." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy from the snow day weekends, the one who'd shared comics and video games before the war took him apart and put him back together wrong. "I'm sorry too," I whispered, "for resenting you, for thinking you didn't care." We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But something shifted. A crack in the wall between us, small but real. The house creaked overhead. Wind, maybe? Or something else testing the boards. We stayed awake all night listening. Tomorrow we'll call someone. A historian, a priest, a demolition crew. Whatever it takes. But tonight, the well waits, and it remembers. The barricade of iron scrap sat heavy atop the broken slab, a makeshift tomb. We hadn't spoken much since the thing released my brother's ankle. The welts had darkened to ugly purple bruises, finger marks that didn't quite match human hands. Too long, too thin at the tips. He kept his sock pulled high, hiding them like a secret shame. We spent the day upstairs, pretending normalcy, coffee, sandwiches, small talk about his kids' school projects, my half-finished paintings gathering dust in the spare room. But every creak of the house made us flinch. The wind rattled windows. We told ourselves it was just wind. The furnace kicked on with a low groan. We pretended not to hear the undertone that sounded almost amused. By evening, the snow had eased, but roads were still impassable. No plow would reach us until morning at earliest. We were still trapped. My brother paced the living room. We can't just leave it like that. What if it pushes through? What if Dad's seal was the only thing keeping it down there all these years? I stared at the basement door. The hook and eye latch looked pathetic now, a child's precaution against falls, not whatever this was. I keep thinking about the carving, I said. It remembers. What does it remember exactly? He stopped pacing. Us, the family, the house, maybe everything that's happened since the well was first dug. Dad used to say the Pine Barrens hold grudges longer than people do. Old things don't forget. A memory surfaced. Me at 10, Dad leading us on one of his educational hikes. He'd pointed to a patch of rusty red water in a bog. Blood of the Barrens, he'd said, half smiling. Bog iron. The earth bleeds it up and the old ones use it to bind what shouldn't walk free. I'd laugh then, thinking it was just another spooky story to scare his baby girl. My brother had rolled his eyes. Now those words felt like prophecy. Night fell hard. We dragged the couch in front of the basement door, piled chairs on top for good measure. Neither of us suggested sleeping separately. We sat on the floor in the hallway, backs against the wall, facing the barricade, flashlight between us, Mom's ring back on my finger, twisting nervously. Around 2 a.m., it started. A soft tapping, not from the basement, from inside the walls. Tap, 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 like fingernails testing plaster. Slow, methodical, moving upward, floor by floor, until it reached the ceiling above us. My brother's breathing grew shallow. It's looking for a way out. The tapping stopped directly overhead, right above my childhood bedroom. Then came a new sound. A low scrape, as if something heavy was being dragged across floorboards. But the bedroom was empty. I'd cleared it myself last summer. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was cold. Too cold. Frost spiderwebbed under my fingers despite the heat being on. Then the croak returned, not from below this time, from everywhere. The vents, the light fixtures, the spaces behind the drywall. A surround sound chorus of wet, bubbling amusement. My brother grabbed my hand, hard. We have to end this. How? My voice cracked. He looked toward the kitchen. Fire, salt, iron, whatever Dad would have done. We raided the pantry, rock salt from the winter bin, matches, a cast iron skillet Dad used to use for pancakes. We even pulled the fire extinguisher off the wall. Better than nothing. Down the stairs again. The iron pile still held, but the gaps between slab fragments had widened overnight. Thin tendrils of black water seeped through, pooling on the carpet like spilled ink. We formed a rough circle around the well. My brother poured salt in a jagged line across the opening. I gripped the skillet like a shield. He struck a match. The flame flared. For a second, the croak faltered. Then the well answered. A surge of pressure exploded upward. Air thick with the stench of decay and bog mud. The salt line hissed and blackened. Tendrils lashed out again, faster this time. One wrapped my wrist, cold burned like dry ice. I swung the skillet, metal clanging against something that felt like wet rope. It recoiled with a hiss. My brother shouted something I couldn't hear over the roar in my ears. He hurled the lit match into the gap. Flame caught, not on water, but on something oily that shouldn't burn. Blue fire raced along the edges of the broken slab, licking upward. The tendrils shrieked, retracting. We backed up the stairs, slamming the door, relatching the hook. Smoke curled under the frame, acrid and wrong-smelling. The house groaned. Walls creaked as if breathing. Then, silence. Total, complete silence. We waited. Minutes. Hours. Dawn crept through the windows, pale and watery. When we finally opened the basement door, the air was still. The iron pile remained, but the gaps were gone, fused somehow. Edges melted smooth as if welded by unseen hands. No water, no tendrils, no croak. The well was sealed again, not by us, by it. We stood there a long time. My brother spoke first. It let us win. Why? I looked at the ring on my finger, then at him. Because we remembered too. We came back together. Maybe that's what it wanted all along. Not to escape, to be remembered. He didn't argue. We left the basement untouched after that. The iron stays, the door stays latched, and when the snow finally melts and the road's clear, we'll call someone. Maybe a priest who knows the old Pine Barrens rights, maybe just a contractor to pour fresh concrete. But for now, the house is quiet, almost peaceful. And sometimes, late at night when the wind dies, I think I hear it again. Not a croak this time. A sigh.